Hello everybody, it's Adrian Plus here.
Yes, and it's Bridget as well. It's also Gracie, our little dog.
Gracie's between us on the sofa, yeah. I've had a very nice quiet day with Gracie. Well, I liked it. She might not have done.
And it's
but it was
snowy
quiet.
and horrid outside, and
Right.
yeah, we're quite pleased to be indoors.
Nice and warm. Anyway, this week, the big news, the King, of course, going in for one thing and coming out with another, or going in for exploratory surgery and finding out he's got cancer of some kind. And as I think I said a few weeks ago, my mother always thought we were more or less brothers because we were born in the same year.
I know. You're both the same age.
That's right, yeah. So my brother Charles is doing a good thing with it. He's making it public, and I mean, having that amount of publicity around something like that always helps.
Always helps.
The
and
money
also,
raising,
yeah.
the awareness, the chance that people will go to the doctor rather than not going. So I'm pleased that he's doing all that.
Yeah.
Really good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he actually does care about it. He's involved in quite a lot of cancer charities, and I think it's quite interesting. Has a resilience that maybe we've underestimated. A way of coping. He's been through quite a lot after all, really.
I suppose, really, like the Queen, we knew nothing about her as a person, really.
No.
And we don't know that much about him, but I do wish him well. I would really, or anybody else who's suffering in that way. What else has caught your attention now?
Well, it isn't really there's been the trial of these two young people who savagely murdered another young person called Rihanna. And there's such a horrible, horrible story. But what has struck me is not so much that. I didn't follow the trial. I don't really know all the ins and outs of it, but is the reaction to it all of Rihanna's mother, Esther. I don't know if any of you listening have caught any of the interviews of times when she's been talking about it, and she is full of grief. It is not that she's sailing past this. She's had a year. It's actually a year since Rihanna was murdered. It's only just come to trial, so it's back in the public eye. But it's not that.
And how is she dealing with it?
Well, this is the extraordinary thing, Adrian. She has apparently been practicing mindfulness, meditation, whatever you want to call it, for years. And she said that what it's done for her, and I do think we need to stop panicking about these things. You know, I think as Christians there's been such a panic sometimes about it doesn't feel as though she's meditating towards anyone. She's just creating space. And what she actually says is that it can give tools to build mental resilience and empathy and self-compassion. And I've thought about that a lot, Adrian, because that hackneyed term quiet time that became so distorted and became such a nightmare for you when you first became a Christian, because it was a sort of imposed rule on you, wasn't it, that you found extremely difficult. And it also,
all lied about
I was just going to say, it also
time.
created a lot of lies among young people
right,
who claimed they were having one. But actually that idea of taking time out.
By the way, pardon me those who didn't lie.
I know.
But we did. My friends and I think we shaved the truth quite strongly.
Yeah. But nonetheless, it is a time that maybe we wouldn't call it that now, but that time when you simply sit. And I think I've been doing that for years. First thing in the morning is important to me, as you know, just sitting.
That's right in the morning too.
Yeah, but I don't know that I'm praying. I don't know that I'm doing anything, but I'm just allowing things to flow around in me. And I don't know. I think it is a chance. As I say, we can learn from somebody who may be not connecting it with faith, but does understand that taking time, it depends what you do in that time. I mean, if you're bitter and angry, then you're going to use that time to build build that, aren't you?
There's actually quite a movement in the Christian church at the moment to use mindfulness, or whatever you want to call it, quite successfully in all sorts of ways, I think. But I was very interested in what you said about compassion, self-compassion, any compassion. So there's a couple of things. In fact, what I did first this morning when I was thinking about this,
yes,
I was looking at what that actually means, and it's quite interesting sometimes to simply look in the dictionary.
Well, they have defined these words for over a long period of time, haven't they?
And
so
and
fair
sometimes
enough.
we forget what the bog standard definition of words that are familiar is. For instance, I looked up compassion and pity, right? Because I was once told off by somebody because I said somebody was compassionate, and they said no, they're not. They're pitying or something.
Oh, that's quite interesting.
So,
so come on then. What is the difference?
Well, compassion is defined as a strong feeling of sympathy. You won't be surprised by this. A strong feeling of sympathy and sadness for the suffering or bad luck of others, and this is the slight difference, a wish to help them.
Okay, so what is pity?
Pity is similar, the feeling of sorrow and compassion caused by the suffering and misfortune of others. For instance, the thing quoted in the definition in the dictionary was her voice was full of compassion.
Yeah.
But it does seem that the compassion thing implies the desire or the actual act of looking for a way to help, as well as feeling it.
Yeah.
And at the
Yes,
moment,
well, that's
there's a lot of false stimulation of feeling going on around. So I find that really interesting.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking about this woman Esther, and she's had this year, which you couldn't ask for a greater nightmare than to have your teenage daughter murdered, partly because of what she stands for. She is apparently a trans girl, partly because she was obsessed by her phone and therefore very vulnerable in that area. But in that year, she has worked on finding compassion. Now, I don't know how far she's got with it. She probably isn't quite sure herself. But she's saying some extraordinary things. She's talking about the fact that you cannot simply blame parents. You can't simply blame mobile phones. But you have to allow yourself to get past your instant blaming. And that produces eventually compassion. I think she would say she's on the road. I don't think she would say she's got there.
I think we'd all say we're on the road, but it is quite true that you can use the sticker or the just this simple sign of believing in compassion to avoid having to actually do anything about it.
Yeah.
We were interested, by the way, this week watching Downton Abbey on the television.
Are we really going to reveal that we've been watching?
Oh, it's wonderful, Downton Abbey. It's to have a soap that is so well written and is has such wonderful actors in it, means that some of the more mushy bits anyway. What we noticed was that
it's
in
on
the
some
course
streaming site,
in the course of an hour, they had, I can't remember whether they were all in the same one, but we had bears, donkeys, dogs, cats, and monkey sanctuaries that were being advertised, obviously trying to raise money during Downton Abbey, and couldn't help asking ourselves, why would they use Downton Abbey as a platform for adverts?
And what did you decide?
Well, I don't know for sure, but if the only thing I could conclude was that in the course of going through watching Downton Abbey, you get a lot of mushy bits where suddenly a lot of false feeling arrives inside you.
Your real feeling.
Well, yeah, but hear me out. You start feeling things.
Yes.
In a way you don't usually. Tears come to your eyes. You think, oh, that's lovely. Oh, that's moving.
Yes.
Suddenly you see a donkey hobbling along, or a dog or a bear in a cage. And I'm not saying I hope they do really well, But I think
it's quite cynical,
it's
though.
A kind of platform. You have a load of tear-jerking moments, and possibly just utilising the unusual depth of feeling that suddenly occurred in the audience. I don't know whether that's unfair or not, but I thought that might be what it is.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's hard. I mean, the charities that are desperate for us to support them, I think, do care very, very deeply about the issues that they're involved in. But that must involve a little bit of, well, I said cynicism. I don't quite mean cynicism, but a lot of how can we best sort of suck some feeling out of people. And yes, as you say, to tune into something like that.
The trouble with all this, of course, is that at the moment that it's a terrible phrase, really, compassion fatigue, but because of what's happening in the Middle East and because of loads of stuff on the news, just the story you were talking about, we are surrounded and battered and bashed by images of suffering.
We are.
And the unfortunate thing, what someone has said to me, was that in the end it can make him want to hide from this tsunami of need and just do nothing.
But you see, the interesting thing is, if you go back to Esther, to Rihanna's mother, she has not let what is the ultimate tragedy. I mean, can you imagine? Well, actually, the equal tragedy is for the parents of these young people who committed this appalling crime, as she empathizes with. But I mean, she has worked against just letting that define her, letting her become, if you say, sort of compassion fatigued, that she's still wanting to make a difference. She's still there. She's still her. She's still able to speak. And I think that's involved a lot of hard work during these periods of mindfulness and quiet, forcing herself to not just go down the obvious and encouraged line of saying you have every right to be angry, you have every right to want to revenge, you have every right. And she's worked against that to a point that she has a serenity that is quite unusual. Really.
I certainly can't identify, I cannot imagine that, and I don't want to imagine it, what's happened to her, but I do admire her enormously. We did learn, talking about, wanting to hide from need, that when we were working with charities in various places all over the world, that what really works is to find a way to show genuine commitment in a way that is actually practical. For instance, and we mentioned it before, meeting a lady called Rose in Zambia, who was suffering from AIDS and obviously was going to die, and feeling awash with compassion or pity or whatever it was. And
to be honest, I think it was also confusion, wasn't it? We hadn't come up against anything quite like that.
No, we were very naive, really. But I remember, I don't know what people think about talking to God, but I remember in my misery of confusion saying to God, where do I plug in my faith in this awful, awful situation? And I remember that there's a bit in the book of James.
You've got a love-hate relationship.
I have, yes. It should never have been allowed in the Bible. I don't know what God was thinking of. It's all about doing things instead of nice, comfortable theory. But the actual quote is the thing the Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And as I looked at Rose, sitting on an old rice sack on the ground, I thought, we are not here to wallow in pity. We are here to be a tiny, tiny part of the work that's being done to help people like this and others in the part of the world where we were. And I found that very helpful. And although there's not a lot of the theory of faith and the navel gazing that we often do about it, it's it's what results from it that you don't feel hollow compassion. You can do something, and if you do that, I think you're on the right road, whatever. So yeah, that was very helpful to me.
And you see, I've been thinking, in that verse, it's to stop yourself from being polluted by the world. And it really comes back, whether you're thinking of Rihanna's mother Esther or whoever you're thinking of, to face what you want, what you decide, what you feel led towards feeding on. I mean, it's actually called the dark web, isn't it? And it's stuff of darkness on the internet. And teenagers are drawn to darkness when you think about it. I mean, the number of young people who want to look like goths. Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's quite exciting. But actually there is a pollution by mobile phone obsession. And I don't know, I found myself thinking about the King of Darkness and the fact that he would want nothing more than to have the young people of our world drawn into darkness.
Do you mean the devil?
I do mean the devil. I mean Satan. I mean, he's no gentleman. I think our problem has sometimes been to give him too much credibility, or to give whatever you want to call it, by suggesting that they are kind of, I don't know, pistols at dawn, playing by, what was it, the boxing thing, the Bloomsbury rules. I mean, whether you believe the creation story or you feel it's a story that teaches us something, there is no doubt that it's very, very clear that he is depicted as a serpent, somebody who slides in and attacks the weakest link, whether it's an Apple desire, or whether it's your background and your insecurity, or your natural personality, or your need to belong. It can be anything, so long as compassion, empathy, whatever word you want to use, is crushed within you. I can only believe that that's what can happen, Adrian, in order for people to commit some of the worst horrors. Somehow.
I still find it very puzzling. I mean, I think people waste their imagination. We were talking about imagination last week or the week before, and for me, it's very hard to see how you can't feel compassion when you know what it feels like to need compassion. But maybe that's something you learn over time. I don't know.
Or maybe that's something that can be crushed out of you, which is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that
maybe.
if you feed on
if
bad
you indulge
stuff.
yourself with that stuff. Yeah, I was thinking about one of the lines I love in the New Testament, because in speaking of Jesus, there aren't many very personal moments. There are some, but actually I was thinking this morning about when, it's nothing to do with this, but Jesus in the temple, speaking to and his parents searching for him for 3 days. And I imagine that night God saying to him, now look, you're supposed to be sinless, right? I'm not going to call this sin this time, but you go home and you do what you're told. Jesus said, but I enjoyed sitting there.
You are 12 years old.
I enjoyed sitting there and talking to them. Well, you can enjoy it again, but just go home and do it. And yeah, what I was going to say was, one of my favourite things is when he meets a widow at the place called Nain.
Yes.
And it says his heart went out to her, which is a lovely phrase. And because it sounds like you're sharing something, you're giving something out. You're really reaching into the middle of where somebody is. Yes. And of course he was fortunate enough to, as some would say we are occasionally, but we won't discuss that now, he had the power to actually do something about it. He began by giving her the worst counselling advice in the world, so don't worry, which everyone would say, no, don't do that. But her son was healed.
But as you say, he had the power. But the first thing was that his heart went out to her as a man, I think.
That's right, yeah.
Not as God, but as a man. So we can tune into that. Yes, we don't have that level of power, and sometimes that's been tricky, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can show your compassion, but it's when people are suffering and you know you can't do anything about it. And one of our most beloved friends from the past was a man called Paul Taphouse, who had learning difficulties that really handicapped his ability to lead an independent life.
They were very specific, weren't they?
They were,
had giantism, he'd had epilepsy from a boy, so bits of his brain were fizzed out. But a large part of him was still there, wasn't it?
Oh, he was very with it, and very full of ideas, and he played music, and he was fantastic. But there came a time when Paul suddenly thought, I want to get married. And he was living in an institution, as he had for most of his life. And I remember us sitting there in a sort of agony of sympathy for him, because he said, how can I get married on my only £3 a week, which was what he received? And there was no way to deal with that, to make it better. So we had to find ways to either distract or move around that, but not to ignore it, not to make it unimportant.
And we couldn't make it right.
Yeah.
But we had to be very careful. You know, you've talked about compassion, and I mean, with that goes love. Your heart goes out to it. We were so sad for him. But it was inappropriate to ever pity him as such, because actually we learnt so much from him, didn't we? I mean, you talked about this £3 a week, which sounds unbelievably ridiculous, but it was just a little sort of token amount of money that he got from being at the community centre with other people with special needs of various sorts. But he loved our involvement. At the time, it was the charity Toy Box, which is working with street children in South America.
That's right.
And he would often contribute most of his £3 in 20p pieces into, he wanted to have one of those special collector boxes, and he did in our house, and he would put money each week. Talk about a widow's mite. I mean, he gave a huge proportion of his income on a regular basis.
And he gave
because
us a huge
he
amount.
cared about these children. He
really
had compassion for them. So it's that fine line again, isn't it?
I was just thinking, I mean, one of the things about compassionate people we have known is that when they naturally offer you compassion, what they do is they make it sound as though you belong in their world.
Yes.
Which is a fantastic thing when it happens. It's as though they say, oh, good, you're here.
Yeah.
Come into where I am. I want to have you in with me. And it's so wonderful.
Yeah,
I mean, both your mother and my mother were very good models for that, weren't they?
Well, they were. I mean, we sometimes talk about things burning in you, but both our mothers were very down-to-earth people, actually. And it didn't burn in them to the point of them joining demonstrations or wearing a badge or any of those things. But I mean, for both of us, we have examples of extraordinary compassion. And for me, one of those memories is we lived in a little road which had a cul-de-sac at the top of it, and there's some very steep concrete steps up to the road above. I mean, it's a bit difficult to explain, but that is the situation. And one night, when it had been very icy, my mother was caught out there in the dark, scraping the ice off these steps, not because she was going to go up in them, up those steps, but because she was so worried about anybody who might slip on those steps.
It's amazing, isn't it? What she was doing was she had no actual official connection with the people who would suffer there.
No. But
they were in her world, in her mind, and she really cared for them.
Yes.
I really thank God for the people we've known who have that kind of compassion. Well, I suppose we can only go on working away, hoping we might achieve that sometime.
Yeah.
But we've been very privileged to know a number of people like that.
And, you know, as always, we'd love to hear your stories. So do keep letting us know.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
We'll speak to you next week.
Bye-bye.